Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, hear about white mold and how to spot and manage this disease. Ben highlights a few of our Merschman Enlist E3 soybean varieties in Group 2 and 3. We talk about managing later planted PowerCore Enlist corn and diseases that may hit them harder. See some yield monitor results directly on our monitor, as well as a yield report planted with Meristem Hopper Throttle.
Hi, this is Joe Merschman. Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Ben, Lynn, and Dylan. Ben's going to lead the discussion today.
Yep. So, unfortunately, twice this week, I have had the opportunity to look at some white mold and had some white mold conversations. One is where we would more likely expect it in the northern portion of Illinois. Conditions were just right and wrong, I guess, for that disease to set in. If we wanted to talk just a little bit about, like, give the nickel tour on what white mold is and how it sets in. There's little fruiting bodies called sclerotinia, and they look like little rat turds. And what happens with those, that's the overwinter fruiting body of the disease white mold. Sclerotinia white mold is the name of the disease.
Yeah, and it actually comes right out of the pith, grows right inside the pith of the plant. So basically, if you're snapping beans or even looking at your grain sample, you can see that what we call mouse turds or sclerotinia in there. So it's anytime you see a lot, it almost reminds me of the old Jimson weeds back in the day, you know, the little black round mouse turds. If you see that in your grain sample, you've got white mold in your field.
Yep, and you're probably going to have white mold for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It's a long-term deal for those fruiting bodies. It takes a long time for them to degrade and not be as efficacious, I guess, for starting themselves, starting the process all over. So the fruiting bodies like humid conditions, they like cooler conditions. So anytime we have an above average rainfall year with the right temperatures going into season, that's why it's kind of a little bit a further north disease, because they don't necessarily like temperatures that are above that 86, 87, 88 degree range. So it's a little bit more of a northern disease because of the climate and the temperatures, and they had a lot of moisture this year, and we kind of expected a little bit of a hard white mold year once we got into the thick of spring. So had a conversation in northern Illinois, and then came back on Thursday and was talking to a local retailer, and they said that Des Moines County, which is just the county north of Lee County here where Merschman Seeds headquarters is located, they had some really bad white mold in certain spots in the field that were taking 15, 16, 17 bushel an acre off of their soybean yields where they had it versus where they didn't.
Genetically, you know, we look at it real intently in Group 2s and earlier, but Group 3s, it's not something that we watch real close.
Correct.
So a lot of the varieties in Group 3 are highly susceptible to white mold.
Yep, and we have a couple plots out this year that I'm looking at 2.6 to 3.7 maturity, seeing if there's, you know, a chance that one of these products may handle that stress a little bit better than others. So we'll stay tuned on that, because we'll definitely give those results once those plots come out.
Well, and Ben, you know, our Starting Line Plus, which is, you know, the base seed treatment, does have Heads Up in it, which has some activity on white mold as a biological. But, you know, if you overwhelm the plant, you know, you can only hold back so much. So white mold, the way to control it, we should talk just a little bit about that, Ben. You can go to wide rows, because it's basically early in the spring, when you get these conditions just really wet and damp, little fruiting mushrooms come out of the ground from that sclerotinia, and then they throw the spores up in the air, and the spores can go in through the flower, but they can also infect the root too without above ground. So it's a very complex disease, and but basically, if you keep wide rows, you know, mushrooms don't grow in the light; they grow in the dark, and so that's one of the control measures. So if you're in 15-inch rows, you go to 30-inch rows, you can lessen the white mold, because it's during that flowering stage that we generally think we get most of our infection. However, we understand it can come in through the roots too.
Correct. Nope, you're absolutely correct. I'm going to have Dylan go over a list that is a summary of ag PhDs had different things, different universities had different things. We kind of came up with a list of some of the management and control factors, but you are absolutely correct. The thing that we need to focus on is R1, first flower on soybeans, because that is when the majority of the infection, where we lose the majority of yield, comes from at that R1 from the mushrooms, which are also called apothecia. So hit it, Dylan.
Easy for you to say, Ben.
Okay.
So yeah, this list came from the Hefty brothers. They kind of battle white mold quite a bit, so we can go to, they have a lot of articles about white mold. So the first one they really talk about is having your soil manganese levels very high to very high in that soil Malic 3 test, so between 50 and 100 parts per million. So we know fertility can be a big issue, or a big problem if you're really on that low side of fertility. If you get that fertility up, all diseases really helps out the plant with plant health. And then also apply contans in the fall after your white mold issue, because we know it's going to stick around.
It's a fungi that essentially eats the sclerotinia. So it's a biological product that goes in, and you only target, it's a very expensive product, so you only target the areas of the field that would have had white mold history. So when you're using contans, it's a biological product. Sometimes it takes multiple years of application to get those sclerotinia to pull down.
So it's inside the stem, so when your combine chews it all up and spits it out, it's spreading it out very uniformly.
Correct.
And obviously you spray that particular product on, you'll start degrading that sclerotinia that's on the surface.
Correct.
And also picking a more tolerant seed variety. That seems like a pretty common one, but it's something that we really look into in our testing. That we know kind of which, normally we know what maturities we're going to be looking in that white mold, but now that's starting to move south a little bit more. We'll continue to grow on that testing side.
And we do have a nursery for a hotbed for white mold. So the products that we're offering in the ratings that we get from that nursery is what we publish. So, we'll have a new set of ratings this year on all the products that were in that nursery.
So with that, talk with your dealers, talk with your sales managers. We know which varieties are on a lookout for white mold issues. So, and then like Joe was talking about earlier, planting in 30-inch rows, lowering that planting population to 100,000 or less, get that airflow moving through that plant. But then the aspect of planting lower populations is your weed control. So we need to make sure we stay on that. It's becoming more of a problem every single year. So keep that in mind if you're pushing that population lower. Using heads-up seed treatment. As many of you know, that is standard in our starting line and starting line plus. So that is a plus of our seed treatment. We've seen it very beneficial in heavy white mold areas. Use PPO and Group 15 as your early post applications. So like Anthem Max, which is highly suggested by the Hefty brothers. More airflow and better weed control, like I was talking about earlier. So with those Group 15s and PPOs, we're getting those weed issues knocked out. Using Cobra right before flowering, even a half rate to 6 ounce rate, kind of once flowers starting or just starting to finish up, that's when that white mold enters the plant tissue. So we need to pay attention to that.
So the reason Cobra works is they believe it's on the label for white mold activity, but it kind of awakens the immune system because, as you know, Cobra is a big time burner, but you're not using it at the really, really high rate to kill weeds. You're using it at the rate to basically shock that plant a little bit to get it fired up to go after white mold, the infection, you might say.
Yeah, so how that works is it's called systemically acquired resistance, and it's the same mode of action as what heads up is, because what it does is when it stresses that plant, it creates a product called oxalic acids, and when you have higher levels of that acid in the plant, it doesn't allow for, it makes it harder for the fungi to make connection or get into the binding sites that it needs to create the infection point. So it's kind of like a double pronged approach, and I also think that by burning the beans back a little bit, if you get a little heat there and you're starting to fry some leaves, it's going to allow for more airflow to come through. So I think that's kind of a two-pronged approach.
But you got to get it right at R1.
Right at R1 or right prior to it.
Yeah, because if you wait too long, the infection's already occurred.
And then you burnt your beans.
And you burnt your beans at the wrong time.
Yep. So then the last one they really want to hit on is your fungicide timing. You're not going to get away with just one application if in these heavy areas of white mold, just not going to happen, or in your heavy history of white mold areas. So a couple products would be Endura, Proline, Domark plus Topsin in your last pass. That would be at R1, R3, and then again at R5. It's going to be, you're spending money, but at the end of the day, white mold can be pretty devastating. So
in the field that I was in northern Illinois, where they didn't have white mold, the beans were growing 80 plus bushel an acre. Where they did have white mold and it was really bad, the field faded from 80 to 40 to 10 bushel an acre. So
right now is a good time to scout, look at your grain samples to see what's going on in your field. Obviously, wetter years is when you have more white mold problems because it is a fungus, and I call it kind of works from the inside out. In other words, it starts in the inside and then you start seeing that cotton-like expression on the outside of the stem, later in the season. So by that time it's too late.
correct.
And a common response we get when we talk about this is guys are very hesitant to spend that kind of money on a program approach that we just talked about, but really what we're looking here is not a ROI in year one. We're looking for ROI in year 2, 3, 4, 5. To your point, when you're talking about getting rid of the inoculum, we just don't want to put a Band-Aid on a gusher here. We want to take care of the problem and get ahead of it, so that way we're back into eventually the 40, 50, 60 and turning upwards, rather than having a continual 10 bushel yield in certain spots.
Right.
So in your soybean corn rotation, it'll be 2 years from now when you got to start, thinking about write that down,
Correct.
Well,
remember it.
The products like the Contans can go on
Now,
this year. They can go on next year after the corn rotation. They can go on back when it's in soybeans. I don't have a lot. Because of our geography, I don't spend a lot of time in white mold areas. The Hefties obviously do. I think that they have a really, really firm approach. One of the best set of recommendations for solving that problem. So,
yeah, they're up in South Dakota, so they have a lot of experience with it.
Correct. Okay, so beyond that, Lincoln, Jefferson, Cherokee, if you take our longitudinal line or latitude? Longitude?
Longitude.
Yep, so if you take our longitudinal line and you basically go east to west, if you want to go 50, 60 miles on either side of that, north and south, that's kind of like our 3-6. 3-6, 3-7, 3-8 is kind of the meat and potatoes. The Lincoln, Jefferson, and Cherokee are owning that neighborhood for the second year in a row. So southern half of Iowa, go north from Missouri a little ways, and then you extend that into Nebraska and Illinois. Those three products are doing absolutely phenomenally. We talked about it 2 or 3 weeks ago. The Lincolns had a little bit of a sudden death. We saw some sudden death in a handful of fields with those, but they definitely yielded through it. I think they are going to be a key heavy hitter again for next year, because when you look at any of our test plots that are coming in out of that general maturity, the Lincoln, Jefferson, and Cherokee are somewhere in that combination in the top 3, 4 of the plots. So very, very strong products from a 2.9 to a 3.3 there.
And they're doing it at his own too. I mean, we get
Right.
against fuller season, they're still keeping up great, if not beating them.
Trucking right along. And I think that's probably a little bit environmental with the amount
sure.
of rain and how things fell this year. From a little bit earlier perspective, Cheyenne is just stealing the show again this year. So our 2022 Series 2.0 maturity soybean is the Cheyenne, and it is stealing the show. It's going to be a staple again for this coming selling season, next year's planting season. You build your product portfolio around that Cheyenne. It's done a phenomenal job, and it's just, if it's not number 1 or 2 or 3 in the test plot, I'm shocked, because that's where the majority of those test plots that are coming in, that's where it's at. A little bit here on the later planted corn. So this May 10th through May 15th, 16th planted corn. I've had some conversations with a couple different growers now that the later planted corn, when it's planted next to earlier season or earlier planted corn, the disease is a little bit higher. The tar spots hitting those areas a little bit harder. And that's kind of one of the things we talked about. I don't know if it was a January prediction or a spring prediction of what we were looking for coming into this coming year, that the later planted corn was going to be more susceptible to disease because it has a longer growing season. The inoculum is already going to be built up from the earlier planted corn. It's had more time to put the spores on. The plant has died. You know, as corn plants senesce, you're going to get a lot more disease pushing through them. That's just the natural cycle of how that works. And then you're going to have all that built up inoculum that can blow into different fields. So the later planted corn is something that you're definitely going to be watching for disease and on how to manage different things moving forward. We don't normally have a spread out of a planting window as we did this year, and it's definitely one to put in the memory bank on how we're going to handle that later planted corn because it was set up for a lot of success. A lot of the late planted corn was put in the ground. It wasn't mudded in. It had good growing conditions. But we always want to make sure we make it to the finish line when it comes to that.
Absolutely. And I would say this year too, with something to put in the memory bank as we're looking at corn, is the stock integrity of your hybrids out there. Could potentially be a year where expression of stalk rot, crown rot might be more out there, I guess, for lack of better terms, when we look at just the planting conditions that we've had and then the growing conditions. So it's a great year for evaluating, evaluating your hybrids on that, and then also looking at potentially changing your management techniques as far as either if you can't avoid planting in slightly cooler and wetter conditions, looking for, as we talked about before, Xyway, with in furrow, or a earlier application of fungicide at 5 feet. I think BASF is 5 feet time to treat, and then look at multiple modes of action and potentially multiple applications as we're pushing through that. This year, I am seeing across different hybrids and different companies that seems to be a little bit prevalent around here. That's really good yielding corn, but the stock integrity is starting to get questionable as we're pushing through the end of this season. So it's a really good thing locally here that we have had really good conditions to get stuff out, because it's probably not the year that you want to let something stand till Thanksgiving or Christmas and hope that it's still standing by the time it come back around.
And that's in competitive bags. I haven't really seen anything yet from a Merschman PowerCore side that we have anything that we really need to be worried about at this point, right?
For the most part, I've seen it a little bit, and some stuff that I've had that was sins that needed to be forgiven. But that's sometimes we make a trade-off of planting not ideally, just to put it in the ground and hope for the best. The very nice part about that is that I've seen when talking about this condition, that late season plant health that we talk about with our PowerCore, your disease pressure that you're talking about, not seeing it as much. From a southern rust standpoint, it seemed like the later planted Merschman corn, I'm not seeing southern rust as bad as some of the earlier planted stuff. And obviously the tar spot looks a little more heinous, but that's what we've talked about before, is that plant is still green in that top quarter to half. So you're seeing that contrast in the leaves, whereas some of the other stuff is just, it's almost defoliated at this point, which is crazy because we're October 10th, 11th.
Right.
And but no, from an overall standpoint, the stock health looks great. And I think that's another thing too is important on that, is to also evaluate then your plant stand as well. I think some of these hybrids, maybe we're getting just a little bit too aggressive on our planting population. And with the PowerCore, you've mentioned it before, that 7 to 10 per thousand is great. And hearing reports now of even 12,000 12 per thousand. So I said that wrong.
Yeah, 12 bushel per thousand.
12%, yeah, there we go. For upwards potential of that. So I'm really curious as we push forward with this. We're going to have more test plots coming in from a population standpoint. If you're looking at stuff that's more compromised, obviously pulling that population back just a little bit, making sure that your potassium levels are pretty good. Back to what we were talking about too a while ago, some of the sulfur deficiency that we potentially saw, that might actually be indication of anthracnose stalk rot. So just a lot of things to remember here that happen, I would say, in a very short window that we need to remember for making management decisions and maybe potentially changing techniques moving forward. But phenomenal yields coming out of the PowerCore stuff again. I mean, I think the cool part, we talk about test plots, and obviously that's publishable data, but from the guys that I've talked to, we are seeing consistent, if not exceeding, some of the test plot data that we've got coming out. And I'm talking 80, 160 acre blocks with from the 108 to the 115, pretty consistent product there.
Yep.
Yeah, PowerCore Enlist has a lot of horsepower because you can go into first trials and look at all the PowerCore Enlist hybrids. And in the top 10, you're seeing 2-3 almost in every test in the top 10 in these first trials. So there's a new kid on the block that needs to be checked out. No question about it.
Especially that 108 to 115 day, if that's your sweet spot for your corn maturities, and it is tough to find a reason not to plant 5 different hybrids right now. I mean, when we're having discussion, if a guy says, I only plant 3, that's how I manage it, it's kind of tough to make that decision on which 3 we want to go with, because we're excited about 6 or 7 of them.
Right. Nope, we can throw up some pictures too. Joe was talking about horsepower, and we got a local farmer sending some pictures of 300 plus bushel corn. I think they're probably taking the enders off, if I had to imagine where these pictures came from. But this was a 2411C-30, 111 day. So we really like that product,
yep.
And it's I would say it's exceeded our expectations.
Yeah, it was blowing right through 300 bushel, and in good. Not just a second or two, but for some distance. So, yeah, we'll show you some yield monitor things that look pretty impressive. So, we feel pretty excited about these products, our corn, our wheat, our soybeans. I don't think we have a better class of products in the going on 71 years and being in business right now. Pretty exciting.
Correct. You want to talk about a new class of different style business. We had a yield report from our area sales manager, Joe Berkey, out in Nebraska. He used Meristem Hopper Throttle Guard X, which is the corn rootworm product. He split out a dry land field, and he ended up finishing up close to 10 bushel an acre on his where the product was treated with the Meristem Hopper Throttle versus where it was not.
So biological control for rootworm.
Yep, plus all of the other goodies that the Meristem Hopper Throttle
it's
throws
got
in
the
with
zinc and all that other good stuff in it.
Right. So he saw a 10 bushel yield advantage there. That definitely pays for stuff. When he started, it was closer to 16, 17, 18 bushel, but this is just a key thing to note here. He's wondered if there's not some phantom yield loss going on, because when he started that field, it was in 17, 18% moisture corn, and he's harvesting corn that's clear down into the 9.8% moisture. He sent me a picture.
Southeast Nebraska.
Right. A lot of hot,
correct,
dry wind that's been blowing for a long time while they're trying to get beans out.
I don't think they have, if I remember right, they've had no measurable precipitation in September. If not, it's been absolutely minimal.
Well, we've heard some 6% beans in Kansas. I mean, it is dry. And then you can go to Ohio, and I've seen pictures from Helene that went through, and they got beans sprouting in the pod. So I know we don't like dry grain because we know the yield loss, but that's better than beans sprouting in the pod. So there's always somebody in a worse situation.
Correct. Eisenhower's have been another one this week that's surprised me a little bit, from test plots to seed production fields coming off to just regular commercial acres. The Eisenhower has had a very, very strong year. And that's our 3.9 bean that we really like for stressful conditions. So,
Ben, I got a question for you. I've had some growers ask it. They're planting our existing Monroe, our release that we released this spring, and they're just having phenomenal results. I mean, they're just elated. Well, we have a new Monroe next year.
Correct.
And they go, well, is this new Monroe going to be better than what I have? I mean, I'm setting the yield record on my farm with the existing Monroe. Will the new one be better?
Yes. all the data definitely suggests that direction. So we've looked at this Monroe for 2 years now. I don't remember the win percentage off the top of my head, but it's like 4.7 bushel per acre higher in last year's testing than
105.8.
105.8. That would make sense. But it was about 4 bushel better than the old Monroe that we had in last year's testing. The testing before that one, before it went down to South America, it was also very, very, very strong. I have all the confidence in the world. It's a little bit different bean type. Kind of looks like it stretches across the rows a little bit better than the old Monroe did, so it's a little bit less of a main line. But all the breeding notes on it, all the guys that take notes and pass on that information to us say that it's an Iowa, Illinois, Missouri yield winner. So that's a heart of our footprint. If 3.7 fits the maturity, that's the one that you want to go
I think
with.
getting out of that main line, it's not a bad problem when we look at it from a placeability standpoint. The mainline beans, we get more, not concerned, but we like to push the population a little bit because we're trying to get more plants per square foot, where this one gives us a little more branching potential, which allows us to get into maybe some better yield environments and hold a higher top end than that old Monroe. You're going to see that consistency for sure. I think that's always been a staple since I've been at Merschman's, that the Monroe has always been a 3.7 product that has been very yield stable across environments. Now, with that came with the caveat that maybe you don't reach up and hit that top end. You're not going to see 120 like you do the Kennedys, but they're always going to be a kind of a high floor, medium ceiling. I think this one you raise the floor and you potentially raise the ceiling as well.
It looks
Sure
like a
looks
stud.
like it.
Yep, it looks like a stud for sure. I got a report on local seed production on wheat. We're about 95% in the ground, so we're going to have good supply for next year as well for here. And seed production in the south will be going in probably next week. So good moisture. Up here we caught a nice little rain to get all the wheat in the ground, and down south they're not worried about moisture at this point. So we should be good on wheat seed for next year.
And we just need a winter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some cooler temperatures.
Well, anything else that we want to add? Well, that brings us to the corny jokes, and I've just been doing a lot of thinking, and when it comes to these corny jokes and stuff. So I thought I'd do a little things that I've been thinking about, and then I'll throw in a corny joke, okay? I'm old enough to remember when paper bags were blamed for the destruction of millions of trees, and plastic bags were the solution. You ever thought about that? Okay, I've been thinking about that. Hard to believe, isn't it? Another thing I've been thinking about, a worm is a pretty disappointing prize for getting up early, if you ask me. Okay, early bird gets a worm. Okay, mm-hmm. All right. Lastly, this is a little husband-wife advice. Okay, my wife asked me, "Is it just me, or is the cat getting fatter?" Apparently, "No, it's just you" wasn't the right answer. So there you have it. Anyhow, we have a lot to be thankful. I know it's a little ways off for Thanksgiving yet, but we haven't been hit with hurricanes like the folks in the southeast. And we're fortunately, I think everybody so far this harvest has been careful and being safe. I know there's a lot of machinery breakdowns, and that's always a bad day, but the weather has been so wonderful up here for harvest, and we can be thankful for that. So we hope your family is safe and you're healthy, and we'll see you next week.